Okay, please don't stress, but I'm gonna drop spoilers for episode 1 of Turner and Hooch. Not episode 2, not yet. Spoilers for episode 1 in 3, 2, 1. Last week's episode actually ended on a note that felt familiar to the original movie, where Scott is now fully trusting Hooch. You are my forever dog and all that. And what that says to me is that episode kind of was the remake or reimagining of the original movie, also ending with the big crime case being resolved only after fully trusting and embracing Hooch as a friend and a fellow partner in crime. So what do we do now? I felt like this episode can make or break my excitement of the show, as this week the show has proved itself if it can deliver the truly original material. We got the remake. Now we're moving on to... yeah, what exactly? Hi fellow Disney Plus watchers, this is Thoughts After a Disney Plus Watch, where we review everything new Disney Plus coming out, and I'm glad you're watching. This is the channel that's specifically about movies, shows, and all that's Disney Plus original stuff. So just a fair warning here before we start, I do want to discuss spoilers to really do this episode justice. So you can press that watch later button if you haven't seen it yet. Still here, let's go. Again, did this episode make or break my excitement of the show in general? Both false. It grabbed my expectations, jumbled it around, threw it in the sky, and made fireworks while it blew all my doubts about this show completely out of the water. Seriously, are you kidding me? This episode has heart, it has plenty of character development, it has a story with enough stakes to care, and it has attention to detail. Joss Peck is... I liked him in this show last week, but I feel like he's even better here. And what do I mean with attention to detail specifically? Well, when I say that, I think about the opening scene, for example, where Scott's smartwatch is waking him up in the morning, but Hooch grabs it before he can, crushing the thing that costs $300. Later on in the episode, Scott references the watch while talking to Hooch about the walkie-talkie, but the real payoff is all the way at the end when Hooch finds the old watch from Scott's father. I like stuff deliberately placed at the start of the story to pay it off later, also when it's just small things. Just always feels like the writing process was thorough, that they cared. Another obvious example is the kissy face, using the one thing that Scott definitely hated during this episode and used it eventually with the help from this little girl against this criminal. Hooch jumping onto the bad guy, licking his face, all that. I really enjoyed the relationship between the little girl and Scott, and it's a classic story where our hero gets placed into a mission of some sort that completely goes against what he wants to do, thinks it's degrading, that he can do better, but ultimately winds up being the real hero. We all know these kinds of stories, but I just found it so engaging here. I especially loved the way Scott was trying to be clever, making up a whole story about evil wizards so that he could make that girl hide out while having fun, doing exactly what the dog trainer has told him to do with Hooch. You see what I'm getting at and why I think this episode is so damn good? And the moment she says, "We are in trouble, aren't we?" So good. Here she proves herself as someone who is mentally grown up enough to notice. And she explaining that she is used to this all her life, traveling around with her father because all her nannies gave up on her. We get a peek behind the curtain of the harsh life of this little girl, and her recognizing that she's in trouble makes sense because of what she's been through. So back to the plot. While the A-team is guarding the city hall, Scott has to stay with Hooch at the hotel, and he's on a diplomatic mission to take care of this little girl, because she wants to play with Hooch. That's the reason. And how and why that was diplomacy, I'm not really interested in talking about that, just as I don't really care that this was about protecting the Olympics and all that. It was not what this episode was about, and was just background setup. The episode was all about Scott, this little girl, and the plot reminiscent of the movie Die Hard, where this one man needs to free all the hostages in the hotel. Now let me get the only negative out of the way. The bad guys in this episode are a bit too cardboard, evil, I am Victor, you are safe, generic kind of villains. I didn't mind it too much, but if they just had that extra thing, character trait or whatever to make them really threatening, that would have been great. There wasn't much there. The way that they kinda show up and then get this whole room of people handcuffed in tie wraps in what feels like a matter of minutes, I didn't really buy into them being a really big threat in the way that they took over. It wasn't very invasive or violent, it was just pretty easy for them. That's the only thing really. I love the episode. I really dig Scott and that dog trainer and what conversations they have about Scott requiring to make Hooch have a fun time while doing his job. That is something completely counterintuitive for him, because when he's in the middle of a mission, the last thing he wants to do is to play around. So I really like how Scott's whole nature is changing and how this dog trainer is guiding him through all these changes he has to make. She's essentially his therapist if you think about it, and there's always some subtext going on. I was talking about this last week too. Whenever they're talking about the relationship relationship between him and Hooch, it often means something about what the dog trainer sees in Scott. There's also more humor, I think, than we got last week. I was really having a good time. Scott, in all his nervous behavior, stumbling upon the words, I love eyes, you have beautiful eyes, after his boss telling him how much eyes are on them to let this mission succeed. That was great. The dog trainer being so excited about her and Scott jogging together that she shouts, "It's a date on the calendar called Thursday." Such good character-centered humor all throughout this episode. And last week we didn't get any main title sequence, and now we have a title sequence? That's odd. I like it just fine, but where was it last week? Maybe the animators couldn't make the deadline? I don't know, it's not that important, just something I noticed. Maybe I'm a bit overly enthusiastic about this episode than I would have been was I just looking forward to the show and having high expectations. I just didn't have high expectations, and this episode doing everything right in terms of character, humor, payoffs, it was just also enjoyable. That this episode is called A Good Day to Dog Heart is not a coincidence. It's a funny, witty, charming iteration of a Die Hard story. I'm excited for next week, I really am. I'm thinking about wrapping this up. Thank you so much for watching. I'm curious, what did you think of this episode? Be sure to let me know in the comment section. Don't forget, if you enjoy the idea of discussing Disney Plus content with us, that red button looks familiar, right? And if you're interested in thoughts on previous episodes, it's all in the description, or you can browse the channel page. Did you like this video? Then be sure to consider giving that a click. Thanks for now, have a wonderful day, and see ya.